Welcome to Season 3 of How About We Do This Together, a podcast of the Northwest Christian Network. Season 3 is based around the 2023 Northwest Christian Convention, happening in Turner from July 27th to July 2nd. Follow the link in the show notes to register before the convention and to watch the videos after the convention is over. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as we talk about how we can do this thing called the church together. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of How About We Do This Together, a podcast of the Northwest Christian Network. And for these first few episodes of Season 3, we are talking with the teachers of our Equip classes, which is this brand new program that we're trying out this year, where we are having teachers come in and teach classes at a higher level than the workshops that are available. So these are going to run throughout the week and provide another level of equipping for those who sign up for these classes. And I'm really excited about this class in particular. It's called Griefworks, and it's being taught by Dave Bruce. And one of the reasons I'm really excited about this is because Dave was my mentor, and I worked under him as a youth pastor in my first ministry job. And actually, when I was working for him, he made sure that I took this class. And I think the best advertisement I can make for it, well, for part of this class, and the best advertisement I can make for it is that he said, you know, you're gonna realize that you have grief that you didn't know was there. And I went into it thinking I don't have anything to grieve, and it was powerful, and it was really, really meaningful as a class. And so I'm really excited that Dave's able to bring this to us at the convention. So without further ado, Dave Bruce, pastor at Enterprise Christian Church, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
For those who don't know, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are pastoring out in Enterprise?
I pastor in the cul-de-sac of Oregon. We are in the northeast corner of Oregon, near Wallowa Lake, which means we are 65 miles east of La Grande of I-84. We are about 40 miles west of Hell's Canyon, and just dipping down below Washington and the counties up there. Literally 2 roads to come in. You come in, you get to the end of the highway, you run into a mountain, so you turn around and leave.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember someone saying when I lived out there that it's not technically rural, it's actually classified as frontier.
Frontier,
like
yes.
A step beyond rural.
Yeah, people ask how far, how far is Walmart? Well, 2 hours. And,
yeah.
That.
Yep. Your monthly run to Walmart, I remember that.
We are so good. Our claim to fame, if you can remember, is we have 0 stoplights in the entire county. So when our kids learn to do a stoplight, they have to go to La Grande, 65 miles away, to learn how to stop at a red light.
Which is also where they have to go to take the test, the drive test.
Yes.
Yes. But absolutely a wonderful place to live and beautiful. I still envy you the view out of the windows of that new building. I will never have a better office view than looking at the Wallowa Mountains.
That is true.
Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to talk about and ask you about is kind of the heart behind this class. What made you want to, because this is a result of study and work that you did in the DMIN program, what made you want to study grief ministry?
My first pulpit out of Emmanuel was up in Dayton, Washington, and I thought I was going to be there for a little while and then move on. And one of the things in the small town was I began to understand that people died, and all of a sudden I was doing funerals. Back in the days where you felt good if you had 4 days notice in order to put it all together, instead of a longer period of time. And so I was suddenly doing funerals, and in my experience at Northwest Christian, now Bushnell, I had had a grand total of one class on how to do funerals. And then at Emmanuel, I had one class on how to do funerals and minister to people that were grieving. And so I had a whopping 2 hours and 15 minutes of training on how to do this. I reached a place to where I was averaging 36 funerals a year, and I felt overwhelmed because I was about every 10 days, every couple of weeks, I was doing a funeral, and it was so hard to try to reach out and help the people that were grieving following. And so it just built up in me a desire to try to educate myself on how I could help my people in a more meaningful way.
Wow, 36 a year?
Yeah. One particular year, I had a real easy first 6 months. I only had 12, and then I had 24 from July until the end of the year. So just one a week was the average.
Wow.
And of course,
that is
sometimes
crazy.
it was 2 weeks between, but a number of times to where you had a funeral a day, or two on one particular Saturday. Whatever it worked out. But the average was once a week.
Wow, that is insane. I had forgotten that it was that high. I have been feeling like my numbers were high, having done like 18 in 4 years, but I can't even imagine doing 30 plus on average per year.
Yeah, I was averaging over 30 a year.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I can complete. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I can completely understand wanting more equipping for that, like wanting to go deeper if it's becoming that big a part of your ministry and that relentless. It's hard to follow up because you're already on to the next one.
Yeah.
And as
and
pastors,
it's funny
we're
because,
so prone to the tyranny of the urgent. Right?
yes,
So you're focused on the service and you forget about the grieving person that you served last week.
correct. So many just got lost, lost in the shuffle because you couldn't reach back.
Yeah. Man. So what did you learn from that approach that informed you, or from that study that informed this workshop that you put together?
Well, what happened was I decided that I would go ahead, and two events happened, Matt, and one of them was, interestingly enough, the funeral director up in Dayton offered a seminar to all the pastors that were up there. And I figured it was free lunch, so why not go on over and take in the seminar? And we went, and interestingly enough, 4 of the pastors that I was with, they hated the seminar, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I had been trained with, 3 points to a sermon, make sure you have a poem, have a couple of good songs in it, eat with the people afterwards, say a prayer, and you're done. That's how you do a funeral. And this one, the fellow that challenged us went through the interview process like I showed you, like I taught you, and how to go ahead and to make that funeral to be something much more personal, so that people didn't feel like they were getting preached at, and they didn't feel like they were coming and not listening about the person who was being spoken about. And so that started, and that really began a role, and I'm going, I need to do something more, because I called it funeral evangelism. Part of it was it actually opened up doors to visiting with people afterwards about coming to church, because so many of these folks were not churched. I mean, they were community people, that they just liked the way that I was doing funerals, and so they came. And so then it was a matter of, okay, how can I minister to these people? And so I started reading various books and doing that. Emmanuel came up with their degree program, and I decided that if I was going to do something, I wanted to try to do it in an academic way, in a more studious way than simply in my office. And so I entered into the D-Min program, and almost all of my class work I somehow related into this idea of how can I use this to minister to people that are grieving. And also, as a part of that, I was becoming well known with the mental health group up in Dayton, up in Columbia County. And they sent me to a special training called the Grief Counseling Grief Institute. And I was certified as an official grief counselor through their program. Part of what I liked about the D-Men program is I didn't have to create new thoughts. I had to show that I could take what was available to me and pull it together so that I could use it in my church situation. That was the purpose of the D-Men. And so I took my training from the Grief Recovery Institute. I took my readings, I took my studies, and then I pulled it all together as best I could to try to come up with a program that would lead me in how to lead support groups so that I could minister to 10, 15 people at a time.
Okay, so that's how it ended up turning into a group, was because they were coming so fast, you needed to be able to bring them together.
And yes,
and
a large part of that was at the end of a funeral, I would let people know that, when my next grief group was going to be starting up. And so back then I would have, maybe 3 grief groups a year. And each one of them's a 10 weeks. So, it covered 30 weeks through the year of doing those studies. So it was, for me, the best way to try to reach out to people.
Yeah. Okay. So what is this workshop that you're going to be doing at the convention going to look like? What are you going to be presenting from that for the people who attend?
I'm still working at it, you know me. But what I'm trying to do, what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to envision, and on the first day, I think I'm going to challenge people to go ahead and to think about the way that they work with people who are dying, and also to rethink funerals, or to think purposefully on how they do funerals. And then on day 2, 3, and 4, I want to talk about the grief processes, and I actually want to take the group through the 10-week session, and I'll rework it so that part of it will be academic. This is why this went in here. And then it's going to be experiential. I'm going to go ahead and hand out the worksheets and some of those things, give them time to go ahead and do it on their own, and then pull them back together. It all depends on how many people we have, of course, but then break up into small groups and actually run the program. So they should be able to get a background of why we are doing this, and then get the practicality of I am doing this. And hopefully they would be able to see that this is something that they could do within their own ministry, within their own churches.
Okay.
Oh,
okay.
And then on the last day, the last day, I'm going to be talking about various ways that we can help our parishioners prepare for their deaths. And that even includes doing what I call an end-of-life seminar inside the church on how to prepare for helping your family once you die. Have this stuff put into a packet or into a folder so that when you die, that folder can be passed to somebody, and that can help the process of their grief. We heard that, old Joseph and all that. Old Joseph said, "Don't leave my bones down here in Egypt." And he said, "Here's what I want you to do." And so he was pre-planning his funeral. And I use that as my, as my understanding, Joseph and Jacob and all. And it's kind of like, hi, here's what I want you to do. And they knew what they needed to do. And that is a great help for people in the midst of their grief.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I like that. I experienced a loss in my family recently, and it's gotten me thinking about mortality. And I was actually just talking to a pastor friend of mine about the importance of us as pastors being able to guide people through those moments that we normally don't like to think about. That we try so hard not to think about our mortality and not to think about death. And as pastors, there's an important part of our calling is to be thinking about that and be able to walk people through that, which can be especially hard when you haven't processed it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, in our hymnology of the past years, how many people, as they were coming up through the Depression and through World War II and all that, the big songs were all about, when we all get to heaven and I'll fly away and a mansion over the hilltop. And we had all of that because life was hard and people understood that death was coming. Mortality was simply a part of what we do. Modern culture, we don't like to talk about death. I found in my experience, especially up in Dayton, when my mom and dad died, both times that happened, I would talk about my grief from the pulpit, and you could literally see the people out in the congregation squirm because they were uncomfortable about me talking about grief. We don't like to talk about it. We need to learn to talk about it. We need to learn how to exhibit that so that our people can do that. Worst thing possible for a griever is not to be able to express their grief.
Yeah. And I remember one of the vivid memories I have of that class is you had us make a timeline of our own grief. And I was surprised at what came out of that in terms of recognizing the grief that I had experienced. Before we did that, I would have said, haven't experienced any. And then to be able to then minister out of that was really helpful.
That's one of the key exercises that we'll have.
Yeah, sorry to give that away.
That's okay.
But that was really helpful for me to realize that I have experienced it, and I need to be aware of that and to be able to minister out of that experience because people are going to look to their minister for help, and I can't just be not thinking about death because it's not convenient.
Right. And there's usually some unresolved grief inside of all of us as pastors, and we carry that, and it needs to come out. We need to deal with that, and sometimes we don't even realize how much grief we are carrying with us. And that's an important thing. Physician, heal thyself. We need to be about the process as well, so that we can understand. We need to understand the comfort, not just hear that we will be comforted.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the other thing, just as an advertisement, as someone who's taken the class, the thing I found the most useful as a minister about what I learned was specifically, and you mentioned this already, the idea of centering the funeral around the person, which you think would be obvious, but is not always everybody's approach. That oftentimes it kind of feels like I have a captive audience, so I'm going to give a canned gospel presentation. And the thing that I have found I've had the most success with in doing funerals is the approach that I learned from you of doing eulogies. And that has ended. And you're right. I found it interesting that you called it funeral evangelism, because your evangelism starts by not jumping into a gospel presentation at the funeral, but a honoring of the person that opens up that opportunity with the people who were there.
I have heard more people that have been turned off by a presentation of the gospel by somebody that doesn't spend time talking about the individual that the others have come to hear about at the funeral. And if you talk about the person, if you go through this interview process and really listen and take a lot of notes, even if you don't know the person well, you can present it well if you are listening to the people that are describing that person. And then when you give that eulogy, then people kind of go, man, he really knew her. And we get a lot of credit for just listening and writing down what other people have said. So maybe it's plagiarism, but it certainly has worked well.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. I have definitely benefited a lot from that. So we've been talking about working with people through grief and a lot about doing funerals. So would you say that this class is mainly targeted for pastors, or who do you imagine taking this class and benefiting from this class?
It was interesting. As part of the doctoral process, I had to go ahead and develop the program, and then it was a matter of what was my purpose for the program. I wanted to develop something that the average layperson could do if they felt called to do that. So I actually took my program up to Pomeroy, Washington, where Frank Musgrave was ministering, and I had, I don't know, half a dozen of his people, 6, 8 people there. I took them through the program so that they could see how it worked in case any of them wanted to go ahead and work the program. And so the concept was, if there is somebody that feels that they are gifted for doing this or really has a desire to do that, then here are some of the tools that you might be able to use to, and I'll just say to structure it. The best way to use the material is to personalize it yourself. But to understand those key concepts so that you have, the skeleton upon which to build the flesh. And so I would say, that it's open to lay people, to pastors alike. This is not going to make you into a professional, grief counselor, but it's designed to help, I'll just say, an average rural or frontier pastor know how to minister to people in his congregation, or her.
Okay. And one of the things we talked about in the first episode of this podcast, as we were looking at substitute preaching, is how the church, it looks like for the foreseeable future, there's going to be more periods when churches are operating without ministers, maybe longer interims or things like that, and that in those times, church members need to be able to fill in pastoral roles. So I bet there would be a lot of whether elders or other church members who have a passion or feel calling towards ministering to the grieving, who, it would be good for them to step into this and be available based on just the limitations of whether they have a pastor, or even what if they have a pastor who's doing 36 a year, it might be good to have more than just the pastor who can walk people through grief.
That's true. There are now professional grief ministry programs, that are out there. This one was a simplistic one that I just designed so that, again, it's just a simple way to reach out to people.
Okay. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about, now this class is sponsored by Emmanuel Christian Seminary. And you are not a faculty member of Emmanuel Christian Seminary, but you are a graduate. And I suppose I should apologize. I didn't introduce you as Dr. David Bruce, mainly because you never wanted me to call you that. But in this instance, you are actually working off of your doctoral classwork. And so this
Correct.
is directly relevant to that degree that you earned. And so part of what we're hoping people will see is also the kind of work that one does during a Doctor of Ministry program. So could you talk to us a little bit about what it looked like to seek additional education after your master's degree, and how the process of getting that degree has equipped you to do ministry in better ways, or specifically work through your ministry to the grieving?
Sure. Back then, Emmanuel first came out with their DMin program, and they divided it up into 2 different sections. You had your academic section and, quote, the practical section, or the ministry section. I always like that, the academic wasn't practical. And so, you had to take an Old Testament class, you had to take a New Testament class, a doctrine class, there was some other academic, a history class, and then you could take one elective of those 5. And then you could then go ahead and have various other classes, whether it was on administration or whether it was how to use prayer in ministry, or other things along that line. The prayer one actually was an important one for me, and so and how we can do that even in ministry, and so they didn't always conjoin together the academic. When we studied the Gospel of John, it was deep and it was good, but it was able to go ahead and to use some of that as to how Jesus talked about it, or how the hope of eternal life, can reach in, help us in our grief, and how we can use that, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Guess what? We can use that in ministry, and so just that type of thing, whatever the class was. And so we dealt with that. I tried to go ahead then and pull the practical into and formulate it along with it. By this time, my classmates were calling me Dr. Death, and that was a good name. It was right in there, and so all the way along the line, you had to come up with a project, and so I did this project. Well, hold on. Had this project.
Oh, wow.
And so it's I don't know, some 280 pages. And so I tried to do it the same way, and I dealt with it. I used the first things to talk about some of the theological questions that we have. I was never challenged to work my way through such things as my 1-year-old child died. Is he condemned to hell? What about suicide? What about cremation? What about pulling the plug? What about what all those things that at some point in time each pastor is gonna be asked those questions, and most of the time we just kind of give it off the top of our bald spot because we haven't done a lot of thinking our way through it. It's kind of like, well, this feels good, so let's go ahead and figure this one out. And so I tried to pick some topics that were dealing with that so that I could go ahead and do that. And then I did the 10-week support group as, quote, the practical side. So I tried to, my project mirrored what the program was designed to do, combine the academic and the practical together. It was actually longer than they wanted. They didn't want it that long, but I prevailed. So,
okay.
And by the way, you can call me doctor, but I actually have 3 degrees from Emmanuel because I have my MDiv and I have my DMin, but I'm probably most proud of my doctor, Yeah, I don't know whether I should share that or not. Okay, so no,
now you have to. You gotta.
Yeah, I got a master's, a fake master's program. I had a master of deception given to me for the practical jokes that I did on Emmanuel campus, and I'm the only one that's ever gotten a master of deception from the college or from the seminary.
Well, that is quite the claim to fame. Maybe we'll have you teach a course on that next year.
I'll bring it to show everybody.
There you go. Yeah. So and what would you say has been the value of having done that, gone back for an additional degree? Because I know DMins by definition are degrees that you get once you're in the field. Right, you have to have gone into ministry and then come back for it, which a lot of times I know can feel daunting. So just for somebody who's considering should they go back when they're in the trenches, what would you say? How would you answer that question of was it worth it and why?
Okay, and I'll go through the process a bit because that's what you actually asked me a while ago. Back then. They were sending some of the professors actually to the Oregon Convention grounds. My first DMin class was held in the nursery of the Oregon Christian Convention grounds.
Okay.
We got around and studied the Gospel of John. It's strange, but they would send it out so that ministers from the Northwest could gather in one place, and there would be 8 to 10 of us, as a cohort. Not a true cohort because we selected whatever classes we wanted. And then other times they would put back-to-back classes into a 2-week program, into a 1-week program, and I'd go back and take a class, and then I'd take another class the next week, and then fly home. So sometimes I would only get in 3 classes a year, okay, or maybe I could only squeeze in 2 a year along that line. But the time in between, when you decide to take a class on the Gospel of John and the professor gives you, I think it was 4 different commentaries, and he basically said, read them and come prepared. Well, I'd never read a commentary as a textbook. It's kind of like you start at verse 1 and just work your way through, and at times it was exciting, and at times it really wasn't. But you were working your way through. What I think it did was it disciplined me in a greater way. It challenged me. The church up in Dayton was very, very gracious to allow me time to go ahead and to be away. But there were a lot of extra hours before I went to work and at home it took a little bit away from family life, but we kept it up. It was a stretch at times. But it challenged me, it pulled me. This was, about 15, 16 years? I'll say I started at about 13 to 14 years after I had begun ministry. And I'd gotten into a habit, and I wanted to be stretched. I wanted more. And so that was the process, and that's what it allowed me to do.
Okay.
Besides, if I didn't have it over, and I'll also gracious, I had a fellow from Dayton that decided it was so beneficial that he funded half of it.
Wow.
So that was such a blessing.
Wow. So he saw the value.
I was actually a reader for him as he was going through a PhD program.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so he was going through his PhD program. I was going through my DMin program, and we were reading and bouncing back and forth. And he had more means than I did. And he said, I need to fund you. And so it's kind of great.
Wow. That is really cool. That's very cool to have someone to support you that way.
It was good.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I just want to give our listeners another highlight of the details here. So this class is going to be a 5-day class, Tuesday through Saturday during the convention, 1 to 4 p.m. And tuition is $100, and they can sign up for that through our website, which is nwchristiannetwork.com/equip, and that will be in the show notes at the bottom of this podcast for you to follow. And this is, like I said, having personally experienced this class, I would highly recommend it to anyone, which is why we came to Dave when we first came up with this idea of Equip classes. And so I'd highly recommend it to anyone who feels a calling to, or feels like they'll have the opportunity to minister through the grieving. It's very helpful.
But realize that anybody that comes in is going to have to be a participant.
Yes.
Because you're going to have to participate in order to make this worthwhile.
Yes.
This is not I'm going to sit back and just watch what other people do.
Right.
That's not it.
And I think that's a big part of an essential part of the value, that you can't really minister to the grieving without ministering out of your own humanity and your own personality and experience.
The wounded healer.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Well, Dave, thank you so much. I appreciate you spending the time to do this podcast with me, and I'm looking forward to seeing what God does in your class in June.
I appreciate it. I look forward to it as well.
All right. You have a good day, sir.
Okay. Always good to see you. God bless.
All right. Bye.
Appreciate you.
This episode was produced by the Northwest Christian Network. Theme song is Simply Beautiful by Scott Riggin. The Northwest Christian Network is a network of Christians and churches gathering together to serve the kingdom and cast their net across the Northwest. Find out more about our ministries and events at www.nwchristiannetwork.com. I'm Matt Holmes. Thanks for listening.